I've been to over 100 doctor's appointments. I've spent 77 days in rehab away from family. I've been to 45 addiction appointments, 19 psychologists, 10 psychiatrists. I've tried 8 different medications, from antidepressants to anxiety to ADHD to bipolar to sleeping pills. But I found one why, right? And that why was my son.
Awe Genge, this is Mental Mythos, hosted by Asagot Toto. Addiction, whether it's to substances or behaviors, has a profound impact not only on individuals but on families and communities. In this segment, we'll explore how understanding addiction and seeking help can be a crucial step in improving mental health and overall well-being, which are stigma around mental health and finding your why. And I believe that when I saw it on your profile and finding your why, it's something different. It's something that most people don't talk about in general. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Hey, no problem.
To start, and also I just want to acknowledge that there are so many struggles that we face, and through this conversation, I just want to delve deep into all realities of mental health challenges as a whole. So can you share a time where you felt hopeless and lost? What were the signs that your mental health was suffering?
Oh man, that's pretty loaded question there. There was a lot of times where I felt hopeless and like I was lost. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know if I was going to make it through. And when I was feeling that, I guess what I was experiencing was hopelessness. I was isolating away from my friends and my family, putting the things that I loved doing. I was irritable. Little things were making me angry. Little things were turning from little things to major things. I was taking like a small event and making it major by, repeating it in my head. I was lonely. I was very lonely, but I only wanted to be alone. When you struggle with your mental health, sometimes you can feel like a burden and you want to reach out to people, but you don't want to be a burden on them, right? Everybody else has their own issues, and so you don't want to bring yours onto them. Like really, people want to help people, right? People don't want to be that person that needs help, and that can be embarrassing for us sometimes. We start to wear a mask and we start to hide those feelings from people, and we can wear a mask because we have the fear of being judged, for the fear of people finding out we have a mental illness, and maybe we have to take a little pill. And that's all right if you do. I still take a medication, but maybe it's a fear of not being accepted or enough, or by looking weak if we reach out and ask people for help or tell people how we really feel. So when I was struggling, I would mask everything. I'd hide from people. I got angry. I would try to stay alone, but I also turned to drugs and alcohol, right? I didn't drink much in high school, but I started drinking when I moved away to play junior hockey. That's kind of a lot of boys' dreams in Canada. You grow up as a hockey player and you want to play junior hockey. And I finally made it, but I started drinking heavily. When I started drinking, I started to find what it did. It was the other mask, right? I kind of had two masks. I had that persona that I tried to put on for people, but I also had that alcohol that brought out the confidence in me, that brought out self-esteem, that brought out the self-worth that I was lacking as a kid. So all these insecurities that I lacked, I didn't know how to deal with, but I also didn't know I had them. But then when I started using substances like alcohol, that's the start, it gave me this feeling of invincibility, right? I could go out, I could have fun, I could come out of my shell. But when alcohol wasn't, fulfilling that completely, because you keep chasing, like my book says, chasing shadows. I turned to drugs, and I found drugs at 24, and first time I did them, I became hooked on it. At 24 years old, I did cocaine for the very first time, and I kind of never looked back. My buddy told me I was funny that night I did it. It changed my whole mindset. I'm like, man, I got alcohol for confidence and drugs to be funny. I have this special concoction that makes me into a person that I love, a person that I respected and could help me leave the house. But what I didn't realize was it was turning me into a person that, a lot of people knew I was an alcoholic. They knew I was a drug addict. I was losing weight. I was sleeping all day. I was losing the skin color. I looked sick, and everybody knew around me, but I refused to see it. I asked myself one time, Justin, do you drink too much? Justin, are you an alcoholic? Yeah, I ignored the warning signs. When I asked myself that, I had a warm feeling rush up through my body, and I knew, but And I ignored it because if you admit to something, well, then you have to change it. And that's the hardest part, is making the change, right? And once you if you admit to yourself that, you're struggling with this and you don't make the change, well, then all of a sudden you're going to be bombarded with guilt, with shame, with embarrassment, and essentially you're going to start hiding, right? You're going to hide your problems from other people. But those problems are going to be like the compound effect, They're going to start to show and they're going to start to build and build. Like the longer you ignore your problems, it doesn't mean they go away, right? They're just going to keep building and building and building. And, my problems built up to where I started losing jobs and friends and family members. And eventually my girlfriend and my son, right? They packed up and left. And I watched my world walk out my door. And it's because I wasn't dealing with my problems. So to answer your question, a very long-winded answer, I guess.
Actually, I just want to touch on the fact that you mentioned problems kept building up. And I think that thing is more of that thing of the society, how we are it is that thing of that stigma around mental health, as men shouldn't talk about mental health, men should be strong, men should be providers. In terms of that thing ends up destroying out the other relationships that we have in our lives. So being able to realize that you have a problem. I have this quote that I keep on remembering, that was said by a guest, where she said that you can't acknowledge what you don't know. And another thing that I want to touch on is the fact of being lonely. And secondly, I would like to quote someone, Dr. Gabor Mate. He is childhood trauma expert. So whereas I saw it on an Instagram reel where he said that there is a difference between being alone and being lonely. When we face problems, we feel like we are alone instead of alone, because that thing, when you feel the feeling of being alone is the fact that you acknowledging your problems. Yeah, I have a problem and I just want to focus on myself. I don't want to, I would say, bother people with my problems. But at some point, that's where we have this thing of no one is there for me. Whereas at the same time, it's us that have this thing of saying, no one cares about me, whereas we are compromising ourselves. That's where the thing of persona when it comes to mental health. And that's the reason why I started this podcast, to destroy that persona, to be able to say, you can feel like this and it's okay. And as much people will laugh at you, at the same time, it's not about them, it's about you specifically. So thank you for that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And in a way, I believe that you're thriving on finding healing and recovery. So for listeners who might be experiencing the similar feelings, what advice would you give them on recognizing the signs in themselves?
If you're getting angry at little things, everything, like little things are starting to make you mad. If you find yourself sad for a prolonged period of time, not just, I went through a bad experience, I'm sad, but you start to feel sad for no reason. If you start to be hard on yourself, you're more negative. You start to withdraw from your friends, your family. You start to isolate from them. All of a sudden, you're coming up with excuses on, well, I don't want to hang out with them. Overindulge in substances. If you're needing drugs and alcohol to have a good time, right? I can't go out unless I have drugs or alcohol. It could be the fact that you need that to, help you come out of your shell, to help you work on your mental health, because we can mask those things with substances, because it does change our chemistry and the way we think. So if you find that you're doing any of those things, quitting the things that you love, losing interest in the things that you love, coming up with excuses to not hang out with people, then maybe it's time to make a phone call or kind of evaluate, why am I doing these things? Is it because I don't have time? I'm not hanging out with my friends, or is it because I'm struggling and I don't think I'm worthy enough to hang out with them, or I don't think that they actually want to hang out with me? Are you starting to have conversations in your own head that have never happened about what they may be saying about you? I had so many times where I had so many conversations with my friends that they've never had with me. I would literally picture them speaking to me about how disappointed they were in me. I was projecting my thoughts through my own head out of their bodies. And, are you projecting your own feelings in an imaginary conversation that's never happened? And if you're doing those things, well, maybe it's time to reach out and ask for help. Make that first phone call, reach out to that friend and say, hey, this is how I really feel. Because that's where it starts, right? It starts with admitting that there's some things I'm doing I shouldn't be doing, or there's feelings I have that I shouldn't have and I don't understand. Well, maybe it's time to reach out and talk to somebody about it, or ask for guidance, or ask for help, or look up some resources.
You said that in terms of having those feelings of saying that you are not loved, you are not worthy, and having this conversation with yourself. And I'm quite interested. How did you overcome that? How were you able to make that call or make it of asking for help and reaching out to your friends?
Well, that took a lot. I've been to over 100 doctor's appointments. I've spent 77 days in rehab away from family. I've been to 45 addiction appointments, 19 psychologists, 10 psychiatrists. I've tried 8 different medications, from antidepressants to anxiety to ADHD to bipolar to sleeping pills. But I found one why, right? And that why was my son. So I got out of rehab. I went to rehab when my girlfriend was pregnant. And when I got out of rehab, I started using again. And then she left with my son. And then I kept going down that path. And I ended up becoming suicidal my first 6 years, and I kind of went up down the path of destruction, feeling hopeless, feeling lost, feeling like this is the end. But then I found the power of why through motivational speaking. All these speakers had something in common, so I started to ask myself, Justin, what's your why? And it was my son. I had to make my son my why. And so then after that, I had to base my decisions around that why. And my first decision was to go back to rehab again. So I went back to rehab. So I did all my counseling and I got out again. And then I hit what we call the pink cloud. And that's when, it was 3 months after, you just realize that you got to continue this for the rest of your life. Those first 3 months out of rehab were fine. I'm flying. I did my coping mechanisms. I got life on. I got a routine. But keeping that routine going, knowing that you can't drink for life, well, it was hard when really all you got to do is I say just for today. I can't drink just for today. But I didn't think that. I kept thinking about the long game. If I can't drink forever, and I kept thinking about all the times I'm going to miss with my buddies and have that FOMO going on, or the fear of missing out of having fun because I'm not drinking or I'm not using. So then I fell back into using again, and I started using for about a month and a half. And then finally I woke up on January 4th, 2019, looking around at pictures of my son and his toys on the corner, his hockey stick on the floor, and realizing, Justin, if you don't do something about it, you're either going to end up dead, or you can ask for help and get better and be that dad that your son needs. On that day, I got my mom to take me to the hospital, and I finally admitted out loud, I had a plan, and that plan was to end it if I kept feeling like this. And from that day, I've been sober ever since. I'm back together with the mother of my son. We actually welcomed a baby daughter as well. And I've really put the focus on my recovery is probably one of the most important things in my life. Yeah, my kids, my wife are super important, but if my recovery isn't the most important, well, I can go back to that person, and I don't want to go back there. So, but now I know what the power of why has. So my why is not only my son, it's my daughter, it's my wife, it's the people that I'm trying to help, and it's myself, because I know that I'm worth living.
That's a very touching answer and a story. And I also believe that I haven't spoken about suicide in a long time in terms of guests in this podcast. The last time I spoke about suicide was back in 2020 or 2021. I'm not quite sure. But it's one of those conversations that I feel like we don't talk about enough, I say, because as men, we don't realize that no one cares for us. And if I take my life today, no one will notice, and it won't have any effect on other people. At some point in my life, I think I was at that point of realizing that no one is there for me. No one is there for me. And if I take my life, as I've said, no one will notice. So, but as you spoke about why, and I remember how my mother has sacrificed for me with a lot of things, and I believe that I owe her my life, and I believe that was my why, and that's where I definitely continued on talking to people like you on this podcast. I really appreciate you for sharing that and realizing that suicide is one of the biggest thing that kills men a lot, and because of us not talking, and also believe that it's a temporary solution. And I love the fact that you ask yourself of not being consistent in terms of unhealthy behavior, healthy habits. Most of the time when we face uncomfortable situations in terms of adapting into new habits of healthy habits. We feel uncomfortable, but when we have these toxic negative habits, we become so comfortable at some point that we don't care what people